Welcome to Biz Ops Exposed, the interview series that shatters myths in business operations and uncovers the truths that drive success. My name is Tanya Kubo, and I am your host. Joining me today are my two favorite operations experts. We have Sonia Narvaez and Gwen Bortner. Gwen is the founder and operations strategist over at Everyday Effectiveness. And we have Sonia, who is the founder, the owner, the operator of Operation QOL, where she helps transform businesses at the ground level by organizing and optimizing their operations. And she has a little furry friend with her today, but together, furry friend included, we'll be exploring the unseen gears of business efficiency and profitability. Specifically today, we are talking about separating financial fact from fiction. What I am hoping we accomplish today is to challenge you to face your fears around finances in your business so that you can appropriately discern between myth and reality. You can make smart business choices, investments, and, honestly, deciding what not to invest. That takes as much wisdom as deciding what to invest in. And I'm sure there are several, but we are also going to go into some myths that we hear all the time in our circles that are related around operations and costs. So, whether you're watching or listening here live or on replay, I would love to hear if what we're saying syncs with what you've experienced yourself, or if there are some additional myths and misconceptions you'd like to add to our list. Now, of course, we have Sonia and Gwen here with us live today, so we're going to get their thoughts firsthand. Before we get into the myths, though, Gwen, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to go to Sonia. I first want to address these fears that manifest around finances. So I'm going to ask you, Gwen, specifically, why do you think it is that business owners shy away from talking about their numbers? And do you think size of business plays into this at all?
I actually don't think size of business plays into it. I think it has a lot to do with how comfortable you are with the numbers and how much time you've been in the numbers, and so that you really understand the numbers. I've known folks that are, starting out solopreneurs that have a much better handle on their numbers than people with 7 and 8 figure businesses, because they don't understand the numbers. They leave it to somebody else, and they end up with surprises because of that as well. So I don't think it has to do with size of business. I really think it has to do with how comfortable and how much time they're willing to invest to understand what those numbers are.
Okay, so I want to drill into this a little bit. Do you think, because I see this a lot, right? I see people say, well, I just don't understand. Do you think they really don't understand the numbers? Like, genuinely, I don't know what these numbers mean. Or do you think that all the numbers in the context of maybe a stereotypical P&L report are confusing? They don't know what to prioritize.
Yes and yes. So sometimes I think they really just don't understand the numbers, and sometimes it's that self talk that they've started from, I'll say fourth grade or fifth grade or whatever, when it's like, yeah, I'm not good at math, right? And so they
Mhm.
just this becomes the ongoing conversation in their head, and so that allows them to. That's their excuse to not take time to learn the numbers, is I'm not good at math. Well, you won't actually have to be good at math because everything's doing the math for you. You just need to, to look at the numbers. But I also think that a lot of times the reports, the information, the folks that are talking to them about the numbers aren't explaining it in a way that it makes sense. I can tell you, I've taught lots of classes to lots of folks, and they're like, I never understood it. It makes perfect sense when you explain it. And I happen to know that's one of my superpowers. I'm really good at explaining things in a way that everybody seems to understand. But if they've been getting their numbers from a CPA who it just makes sense to them, often that's where the confusion comes in, and they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to feel like they're dumb. So they don't want to ask a dumb question. And but often when somebody actually takes the time in a group to say, I don't know what that means, everyone else is like, oh, thank God you asked. I had no idea what that meant either, you know. So I think it's yes and yes.
Okay, I'll let you off the hook there for just a moment because I have more questions to ask about that. But Sonia, what has been your experience working with CEOs and their feelings or fears around looking at their finances?
Well, I'm just gonna the cat's done with me apparently. So thank God before this question came up. So what I have found is, absolutely what Gwen mentioned, which was there is a lot of unknown. There's a lot of like, you know what? I'm not even going to try to make a budget or like actually use my QuickBooks. I'm just going to let the accountant and the bookkeeper, like, they're going to be in there. And hey, I've been guilty of this too, where in the beginning of my business, I was just like, cool, revenue is this, expenses are this. Those are the two numbers I need to know. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I got bigger and, started to mature, I needed to start just layering that with more numbers, right? What do my P&Ls look like? What does my balance sheet look like? Am I taking on liabilities? What are assets? So it started to get bigger and bigger. But I do find that it can be intimidating, because sometimes the numbers say this awesome idea that you had, an exciting, new venture that you embarked on is bringing you down, like, financially. And that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Okay, so she just dropped that bomb and then muted herself out. That was artistic. I'm just going to tell you right now, Sonia, that was artistic. Okay, so okay,
Yeah, that was a great mic drop.
I was gonna say, I don't think we can just let it hang there. I don't think we can. I really think like we need to hear more about this, and I'm happy to have Gwen respond. But so what I just heard, and Gwen, please, if you heard something different, let me know. But maybe like we're not saying it's not this, oh, I don't want to feel dumb, or this really does confuse me, but maybe there's a little piece of I don't want to be confronted with the reality of whether my decision, my big idea, this thing I'm really excited about, I don't want to be confronted with the reality of whether it pencils out.
Sometimes the data sucks. It doesn't make us happy. And we can do the thing that one of my dogs used to do, which when I needed to give it a pill, it would close its eyes and say, well, you're not there. And so now you don't exist. And it was hysterical with the dog that the dog would actually do this. But I think that's the same thing. That's exactly what Sonia is saying is, well, if I don't look at the numbers, then I don't actually have to address whether or not the data, what the reality, what the data is telling us. And I'd love to say that because I love numbers, that this has never happened to me, but that would be a lie. We all do it. We all do it. There'll be times it's like, well, I know the numbers aren't working, but I'm going to keep going anyway. And it's like, really? Is that a good idea? No, it's probably not a good idea. And so I think there is sometimes that really is that is piece of it. It's like, I don't really want to know what this means. Because it's going to not make it as fun for, depending on, how you want to define that.
So if I was the CEO that said that, and I'm assuming nobody like walks up to you and says, oh, by the way, I don't want to look at my numbers because it's not fun and I don't want you to tell me I can't do cool stuff. I'm guessing that most of us aren't quite that self-aware. But
occasionally, you'd be surprised. Occasionally I've had someone say, it's like, well, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just curious, Gwen, though, how would you coach me, or how do you coach yourself? You said you've experienced this before. How do you coach yourself into a more productive mindset?
So part of it is to get down to, and it's where I, focus everything all the time, is what does success actually look like for you? And for most people, the business needs to make some amount of money. And if you're, if I'm going to use a product example because most people can do products in their head easier than they can with services. But if you buy if you buy something for $10 and you're selling it for $9, you're losing $1. How long can you do that? Well, how many dollars do you have to lose? It's easier to kind of come up with those numbers when we're talking about tangible things where we are buying and selling in that way. But you actually can do the same thing with services, and that's where it gets a little trickier. But when people say, yeah, I can't do this and I can't do that, or this money isn't happening or that, it's like, well, let's actually look at the numbers. And once you start explaining how, if we think about it differently, most people are really, really surprised, because often it's the idea of this worked once, so I'm just going to assume it's going to keep working. And related to that, and we're probably going to jump in there, but I'll just give a little feeder, is we get so focused on the sales number that we forget about the costs number, whether it's the cost of the selling it, whatever it is, whether it's a service or a product, and just the overall cost of being able to run the business. And I had a client recently that it was during Black Friday, right? Black Friday sales, right? I know, Tanya, this is one of your favorite things. But she was selling physical product. Okay, so Black Friday sales, typical thing. And she talked about giving these huge discounts and all of the other pieces. And when we talked about it, I was able to show her with the numbers, because the numbers don't lie, that what she was doing was making sure that she couldn't afford to refill the shop with the product that she was selling. And she said, but my sales are so much better. And I said, yeah, but what happens at just below that number? What's that number? And so we did a comparison, and her sales, and these numbers are not even close to right because I'm doing off the top of my head. But for instance, her Black Friday, week the previous year had been, $30,000, for that week. And this year they were only $10,000. But when you looked at how much money after selling her product, her $30,000 week, she only had a tiny bit of money left, and her $10,000, she had more money. And it was like, oh, now I'm seeing the difference of it's not just one of the numbers. We have to look at all of the numbers.
Got it. Okay. I think that is helpful. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sonia?
I do, but I feel like it might open another can of worms. So I don't know if I want to, but let's be real. Who doesn't want to open the can? So one thing I do want to say with that is, see, this is what happens. I do an intro and I immediately forget what I was going to say.
Okay. I'm here for it.
I will say that, one excuse, or one, I don't want to say excuse, but one thing that I hear often from people is, oh, well, you can't, read people from the data, right? I used to work in public health, and one thing is we always try to gather data. We always try to do research. But we use multiple data points. We use multiple different factors. When we're looking at the numbers, sometimes we tend to look at the numbers in a way that can be also favoring us. So it's like, oh, well, I knew that, this was not going to do so well this month. So next month, though, it might be better. And if it's better, even by 0.05%, it's working. So I know I do this to myself, where like, no matter what, it's a win, because we got to have a positive mindset, right? Like all of these
Thoughts are things, friend. Thoughts are things.
Exactly. So, but that's just one thing that I, want to mention, because I think it's definitely something that I encounter a lot with CEOs in terms of finances.
Yeah. So, and what I'm hearing is there's a context element, right, to knowing your numbers. So in the circles I run in, Now, I do end up working with a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs. And so they tend to have an inner critic that could I don't know, it's louder than a marching band doing a John Philip Sousa number, seriously. So they've got this inner critic. And so for them, I find that they look at their numbers and they don't know what good is. Like, they don't know what averages are. They don't know what average profitability is. They don't know what average revenue is in their industry, in their niche, and what they're doing. I remember the first time I shared some data out of a coaching federation that, like, the average coach that had been certified by their program was making $20,000 a year, right? Like, all their marketing was like, get a certification from us and you'll make six figures. But then the data showed that their average coach was actually only making 20,000, right? So then if you were a coach out of that program and you were making 30,000, well, you could feel like a failure because it didn't match the marketing, or you could go like, hey, I'm above average here. So I see the same thing with businesses not knowing like that 10% growth year over year is actually good growth, because all we hear is everybody talking about how they double, right? Oh, I doubled from last year, 3x in 2 months. Gwen, because you have this longer history, can you just tell me, like, has that kind of always been around, or is that something that it's more post-pandemic 2024?
No, absolutely. It's been around forever. It's the specific data points, the details of it have always changed based on what's going on in the universe, but it's always been that way. There's always this miscommunication of information. I think it's way more prevalent with the advent of social media, and then its prevalence, over time has made that way worse, because everyone's taking what everyone says as fact, which you can prove almost anything with data. So it's like, oh yeah, they're saying this, so this must be true. They're taking one point, and one point that is a true statement, and extrapolating it over 1,000, which isn't actually reality. Right. So I think we see more of it now because access to that information is so much faster, but it's always been there. There's always been versions of this, of, oh, well, if you aren't doing this, you aren't successful, or this is what success looks like, or this is what you should be getting out of it. And so I think it's been an ongoing issue. It's just I think it's escalated would be the word I would say.
Do you have the same experience, Sonia, or something different?
Yeah, no, I've had the same experience. I agree with Gwen in terms of the it's becoming a higher priority for people now to understand those numbers. It's become a little bit more it's become, with the rise of bookkeepers and accountants and CFOs and fractionals and financial and comptrollers and all of these things that we had before, but I think are expanding a bit more in the entrepreneurial space. We're starting to pay more attention. They're starting to be able to give us things in terms of having numbers available to us that, like, we ourselves wouldn't be able to pull on a regular basis. So I definitely think that there is more of a priority right now to be able to know your numbers and see them and review them on a regular basis. I don't think it's anything new, but I do think as well that as you mature in your business, your relationship with those numbers also changes.
Okay, and how does it change?
I will say that, the feast or famine, cycle of entrepreneurship is really, really tough. But what we start to realize is we start to set at the beginning, we always think like, all right, I'm going to pay like all my bills, my, contractors, everybody, I'm going to be at the bottom. Right now we have profit first. That's kind of more of that, pay yourself, and then, make sure that the rest kind of covers everything. And so there is kind of a shift now in being an entrepreneur and who gets paid and when they get paid. And um, also, I'm sorry to say, I've seen some people pay themselves and not their contractors, which isn't great either.
Mhm.
And so that's a whole different story because you should not do that. Sounds really unethical. And it is really unethical, but whatever. Anyway, so the point is, I think the relationship has also changed in the sense that, you're able to, when you're confronted with these, you kind of either have to go down two paths, right? Ignorance or acceptance. And then understanding, like, what are those next steps? What do we need to do? What do we need to tweak? Who are the people we need to talk to? What are the things we need to do? And, this sort of goes into our sales and marketing conversation of last week, right? Like the
Mhm.
marketing. Just because you hit, 25 people on a call and you look at your close rate and you've closed one, like the marketing is there, you're getting the people on the call, but now we've got like a different issue and you're looking at
Mhm.
those numbers and those metrics. And, so it's not just kind of finances, it's metrics, as
Mhm.
well. So that's what that's kind of what my thoughts are on that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So, part of why I'm asking these questions about context is because there's a part of me that thinks, and this could just be my own experience, but when I don't understand my own numbers and I don't understand my like opportunities and challenges that I can see in my profit and loss statement in the greater context of what's normal, then I feel like I can't make wise decisions or educated decisions on how to invest appropriately in my business growth and development. And so, what I'm wondering, because one myth that I hear a lot is, well, I'm going to say what I hear a lot, and then I'm going to tell you like how I've labeled that as a myth. What I hear a lot is, um, you know, I can't invest in my business development until I hit six figures, until I hit, I need to get to $250,000 before I can afford to hire a mini me to do some client delivery. Or I need to do, I need to make a certain benchmark before I can afford to do this, before I can afford to do that. And part of me just wonders if that's this thought, right? That it like takes all this money in order to do all these things, and maybe not quite an understanding at how that investment actually feeds back into the business growth. And so what I have labeled this myth is operations is only a cost center, right? When I invest in my business growth, the only thing that I am doing is increasing my expenses. So I'm curious from both of you what your thoughts are, like what feeds that belief that operations is only contributing to expenses, it does not directly contribute to revenue. And then I'm going to ask you to speak your own truth. I labeled my own myth, you get to label your own truth. Let's go Gwen, and then we can go Sonia.
So the reason people believe that is because that's mostly true.
Okay.
It really is. Operations mostly is expense. Um, and but it's expense in supporting the business existing. And so it's a generalization, and most generalizations in their truest form are true. And back to once we get to context, then it starts changing a little bit. But most operations really is an expense. However, can you do the thing you're doing without that expense? Right?
Mm.
That's where it becomes the issue. And uh, one of the statements that I in a book that I was listening to recently, I can't even tell you which book it was because I think I've heard it 2 or 3 times in recent books, is talking about how do you evaluate, and it's like, is this contributing to getting new sales, or is it contributing to delivering the thing that you're selling? Right? And operations is contributing to the thing that you're selling.
Mm.
It's making sure that you're able to deliver the thing that you're selling. But from a financial standpoint, most of that will land in the expense part of financial statement in the P&L. So there's truth that operations is expense.
Can you give me a specific example of what it would look like for operations to contribute to the delivery of what you're selling?
Sure. Well, I'll use someone on my own team who's I call her my amazing support person. Her real name is Andrea, and, and she makes sure that we have good communication going all the time, but she doesn't create the sale.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't truly deliver the service. Most of the time, that's me. But
Mm-hmm.
she's making sure that people are getting scheduled onto my calendar, that I'm able to have sales conversations as I need to. But Andrea is purely an expense from
Mm-hmm.
a P&L kind of standpoint. But she's really critical in helping me make sure that I am able to deliver in a consistent manner. I mean, could I do all of that? Yes, I have historically, but I also know, based on having her on the team now for as long as I have, that she improves my delivery drastically. She allows me to be able to do more delivery with less stress on me.
So as a community person, I'm always looking at people in those kinds of roles as boosting retention, right? Like when I
Yeah,
work on membership
exactly.
sites and stuff, right? I'm always like, well, your retention, like that's money too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if another entrepreneur was in your same shoes and had a customer care, a client care professional on the team, do you have an easy-ish, I'm going to say ish, way of tracking the contribution to revenue in the form of retention in that case?
Most of the time, no, unless you've been tracking it before.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say before person X joined the team, the average length of time someone stayed in our program was, 9 months. I'm just making up numbers, obviously. And now that we've got, our amazing support person, the average length of time is 12 months. And so you can say, okay, so it's 3 months of additional revenue that's, but you'd really need to be tracking that. And of course, that's one of those things that there's a lot of things that are playing into it. That's probably a major contribution piece, but it may not be all of it. But that would be the one way. But often we don't start paying attention to it until after it's passed, and so we don't actually have the comparison data to be able to get us to the future.
Okay,
data.
that makes sense. Now, Sonia, when you and me were talking earlier about this idea of operations only being a cost center, you had brought up that in your experience, there are several areas where making smart operations investments actually does improve profit margins. And some things that you had mentioned were optimizing resource use and even in reducing waste in the organization. Can you give us some just like clear examples of what that would look like for the average business, especially as a CEO who might be watching today?
Oh, roles and responsibilities. There is just, there is something about your $85 an hour person doing the work of a $30 an hour person, and how right there, that is resources that are going down the drain because, you haven't found someone, you haven't thought about this, you haven't realized it. So roles and responsibilities is one of the biggest areas that I see that we can, optimize, and we can delegate, like we can be as, we can use it to be as efficient as possible, in terms of that, like money and resources. Because if, I keep answering my emails when I know that somebody else can, like I have a lot of issues being neurodivergent, like context switching and paying attention and staying in there. And so I will say in my email sometimes all day, and all of a sudden I'll use it as my task list. And all of a sudden now I haven't done anything that I'm supposed to do. So, but how many of my hours that I charge, $200-$300 sometimes, like an hour for client work that I need to get done, how much of that am I wasting, right? How much money am I really spending on the little things that I'm not supposed to be doing, when I could delegate and then also spend time on the things that I could be doing, more business development, connecting with people, like things like that. So I would say that's one area that I definitely see. Another one is, I don't know if this is a word, but condensing your programs. So there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of different programs that can do a lot of similar things slash, different things. And I'm guilty of this too. Like, I love my project management tool. But at one point or another, I was using another tool to help me schedule my day, because my project management tool had all of the tasks that I needed to get done, but it didn't help me see what I needed to do on a daily basis or what tasks I needed to get done that day. So then I got into another program and I was like, cool. So these two connect. I now see my day, but now I'm paying for two different programs. Luckily, my project management tool actually rolled out a new feature. And that was it. So it was beautiful. But you can get into a habit of saying, cool, I need this little piece, so I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to need this, so I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to use this program to do that. And all of a sudden you are spending $500 in subscriptions. That's why, companies like Rocket Money are in business, right? Because we have subscriptions that we don't even know about that we're paying that, make a difference. So I definitely think in that aspect, those are one of the things that you can really think about. Those, who is doing what and how much is that costing, right? Because there is a cost of labor that we don't necessarily think about or look at, because, especially for employees, we're just kind of like, all right, cool, here's what we pay them. This is, I guess, what it's going to cost for us to have this employee, without thinking about, well, fringe, or we're thinking about, what is my time for delegating? What are they doing? What am I doing? If they don't actually know what they're doing, how much time are they wasting? There's just a lot of areas in that sense. So those are my two kind of favorite first places to check when it comes to understanding that type of profitability, where we can save money / cut costs.
Okay, so what I heard you say, I just want to sum that up for anybody watching or listening, is the first place is really making sure you have the right responsibilities assigned to the appropriate roles, so that you don't have the $85 an hour person doing the $35 an hour task. Or, like, can you find a $35 an hour person who is perfectly capable of doing the tasks that have been assigned to the $85 an hour person, so that they can do work that is more commensurate with the role that you have assigned to them. The second point you are making is the importance of evaluating and simplifying your tech stack. Because we all love tech. I think what I heard you say is that we all love tech. We all love new shiny, bright tools, but we don't always account for the cost of acquisition in terms of learning the tool. We just think, oh, it's only $20 a month, right? We don't think of, is this going to take me 2 weeks to figure out how to use it, and then another 2 weeks to implement it into my existing systems? And not to mention, does it talk to all the other things? Do they play nicely together? That right there is an inefficiency, both in time and potentially in money. Okay, so great that we've got that summed up. I feel like that then leads to a natural next question, potentially another myth, where, the first one we're talking about is operations is always a cost center. And Gwen said, well, in many cases, yeah, it is actually. That's just the nature of what it is. Then the second would be, well, if that's true, then cutting operations costs should always increase my profitability. Now, Gwen, would you say, is that true or false?
There is
Yes,
almost
I was leading the witness. Just so
yes, you're definitely leading the witness. So yes, there's almost always some operation costs that can be cut, which will increase profitability. But you also can cut it so close that now you're losing revenue, right? And so it's as all things, there has to be some balance. There has to be some, looking about the pros and the cons, doing the evaluation to see where that is. And so it is possible to, increase profitability by cutting costs. And a lot of times bringing in someone who's an operations professional, that really is what they'll help you do. They'll help you figure out where are those places that you can cut to go directly to your bottom line. It's one of my, it's one of the things that I love about being able to find savings in operations, is it drops right down to the bottom line. But completely eliminating as much as you can of your ops often ends up costing you more, right? Because, and this is really back to what Sonia was saying, is you end up getting the wrong people doing the wrong roles, and you're overpaying for things. One of our clients uses quite a few subcontractors to deliver service, and sometimes they get caught doing administrative stuff, and it's like, we're paying you way, way, way too much money, because this is a high-end consulting, boutique consulting business, to be doing administrative things. There are other people on the team that can be doing administrative things, right? And so that's a place where it's like, oh, but what if we didn't have so and so? Well, yeah, then that cost is going to just skyrocket, right? So there's a balance there of finding where do you do that, and using the example that Sonia was talking about in the tech stack. You can try and consolidate everything to a single app, but that's not always the best answer either, right? And so it's that balance back and forth of figuring out where is that happy medium, right? Where is the moderation, the moderate answer that's the blend of the two. And what I often will see is if people try to consolidate it too much, they're either overspending on things, or they're just trying to constantly make it up in sales, and then often they aren't delivering well. And of course, if you aren't delivering well, then your people start talking about that, then your sales aren't going well. It becomes this snowball. Oh, and look here, I am out skiing. It becomes a snowball effect, right? Because it just rolls and rolls and rolls as it goes downhill. So to me, and it's my answer for most things, is moderation. Yeah, we there's usually some things to cut, but it doesn't mean you just want to completely eliminate it. That's too extreme as well.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense to me. Based on Sonia's facial expressions, I think it makes sense to her. I'm curious, Sonia, because you tend to have what I'm always calling that boots on the ground approach with your clients. Can you think of any examples where cutting operational costs led to negative results? Like where you're like, yeah, we did this thing, and maybe like I knew it was a bad idea all along and it turned out to be a bad idea, or we did this thing, it sounded good in the moment, but then it just didn't accomplish what we'd hoped. Any of those come to mind for you?
Yes. I had a client who knew exactly what project management tool worked best for them. They knew exactly what it was. They would not change their mind. They were like, this is the one I want, over and over again. And I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. I have no problem with this. I'm going to, put everything we need in there. I will fill it out. I will put in our tasks. Like I'm going to, populate it with everything you need to just start working in it and taking it over. And don't forget, you have to buy 3 additional seats. So that's 4 seats total for you and your team. And then we're going to have to train everybody on it. Fingers crossed that you're tech savvy, because Mondays.com is not one of those that you can just kind of hop on. I'm sorry, Monday.com. But the person who used that program the least was that individual, that leader. They never put anything in there. They always use Slack to send in their notes. They always use some type of Microsoft document. It was never used. And so, that's hundreds of dollars a month that we invested into this program, not to mention the time it took me to populate it, in addition to, the time it took me to train everybody and everybody else's time that it took them to get trained. All of that money down the drain.
Okay. So that's an example of making an investment that ended up being much more costly in the long run. And it's interesting that you use that example, because we've got somebody who's joining us live right now who said, I love this. I'm going to just read it verbatim, right? People so often use tech stack decisions as a procrastination tool, right? They get stuck in analysis paralysis on tech tactics instead of dealing with bigger strategic decisions that actually get to the heart of the issue at hand. Gwen, I'm gonna turn this into a question for you, because I think it's an important one for anybody. I don't care if you are a professional watching or listening here, or you're actually a CEO. What questions should you be asking yourself to determine whether you are focusing on the wrong thing here, right? Are you avoiding a bigger strategic decision that actually gets to the heart of the issue versus just like, ooh, tech?
Well, and it's the question that I ask, and not just tech, quite honestly, it's about
Yeah.
all things, right? Is this preventing you from actually being able to do the thing that your business is designed to do, right? Um, and because I've seen it with tech, I've seen it with branding, logo
Mm,
things. I've seen it with, marketing choices. I've seen it with hiring people. you know, I've seen it across the board. It's actually kind of a universal, and tech is, tech stack is a perfectly valid option. And the question is, does it prevent you from not making this decision or not having this in place? Does it actually prevent you from doing your job? Are you at capacity? Are you, whatever happens to be going on? And so often when if you ask that question, it's like, well, no, because we can, we're doing it this way. And it's like, and how much is it costing you? Are you not able to keep up with it? Are you getting behind? And it's like, no. It's like, okay. So it's the phrase I use often is, you're solving a problem you don't have yet. Right.
right.
And because we like to think ahead and we think that that's planning, but the problem is, if we're trying to solve a problem that we don't really have yet, that means that we don't really know the details of the problem,
Hmm.
because we haven't gotten to the problem yet. We're anticipating the problem. Lots of us like to worry, and so we're really good at anticipating problems. And it's like, yeah, we don't actually have that problem. Let's not solve that problem. Let's solve the problem that we actually do have, which is usually someplace completely different, and often the place that we aren't wanting to deal with. Right. I'll use a random example, but is often the case of what the real problem is you've got a wrong person in a wrong seat, and we don't like having to have those really hard conversations. No one likes to have it. Well, there's probably someone in the universe that does, but most people do not like to have those really hard conversations where someone needs to be let go. Maybe they're a perfectly good person. They were great. There was all these things, but we're going to focus on this other thing and not focus on the reason that we're struggling is because this person isn't the right person. So instead, we're going to say, oh, it's because we have the wrong tech. Well, no, that's probably not it, right? So the question is, what is actually preventing you from moving forward? That's the thing that we need to be focused on. And like I said, tech is one example, but it's universal across the board. I mean, you can just put the blank in there and fill in almost anything.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm over here and I'm debating on my next question, but I feel like with where we're going in this conversation, like, I don't feel like it's fair to not ask the question, because I feel like with all this conversation about technology, cost of acquisition, managing a number of tools, the tech stack, because most of us, I know, Gwen, you work with product and service-based businesses, so you do work with folks who have brick and mortar shops in addition to folks who have online businesses. Sonia, you work with a lot of online business owners. I work with mostly online business owners, a few brick and mortar. I feel like we have to talk about AI, guys. I don't feel like we can not address this, because I mean, the circles I run in, right? I hear a lot of, just have a GPT do it, right? Program your GPT. Your GPT can make these decisions, do these things, right? It can help reduce the cost of the operations, either by having some sort of AI fueled tech stack that does things automatically so that a human doesn't need to, or for some folks, they really do believe that a chat bot or some other type of AI tool can replace a human. So and I'm going to have to ask like 5 questions around this. I'm going to try my best to streamline though. But I feel like, so first of all, Sonia, because I know you have worked with a lot of people who are making staffing decisions, even though you don't hire staff for them, you walk them through that decision-making process. Like, can AI really replace a human? I'm just going to ask that direct question right here, as polarizing as it might be. Can it replace a human? And what are the pros and cons of walking through that approach as a CEO?
So I'm probably going to get eggs thrown at my house. But no, AI cannot replace a human. AI can replace, AI can take on tasks that a human no longer needs to do, but AI does not replace a human. I don't know if you've seen iRobot, but go watch it. um,
And
so
I'm just going to jump in. It
yes,
can help make the human more efficient or
yes,
more effective, right? We can
yeah.
get more productivity from
Yeah,
ourselves. But
absolutely.
yeah.
100%. It can, make our lives easier, but to answer your question, no, it can never replace a human. Um, and to walk people through certain things, we do a lot of you really start in terms of that automate, delegate, eliminate, right? That list of tasks that you take on or the list of tasks that your people take on. And what can we do with those things? And sometimes delegating or outsourcing is to a tool, right? It's not always to a person,
Mhm.
because sometimes you can outsource to a tool to automatically send a thank you email after every meeting invite you've had. But guess what? Sometimes those meetings lead to different directions, which will require different responses. And that's not always going to be, easy to pick out. Sometimes you have to be able to tell somebody or even, press the button to make your tool send them a separate email.
Mhm.
So, I always like to say to people, like, somebody always still has to press the button somewhere. Um, for something to turn on. So, I walk them through what types of that automate, eliminate, delegate exercises to figure out what are those tasks that we can take out, take on. We also look at how are we trying to expand and how can we use AI or anything at our disposal and our resources to ensure that the expansion is sustainable and successful. Um, and I also say, we also think about what type of person do we really need in the role, right? Is it somebody that needs to create emails for high net worth individuals, or is it somebody that just needs to be able to plug something, a template in and play?
Mhm.
So I think that that also makes a big difference.
Okay, that's helpful. So, Gwen, I guess from an operations perspective, let's just, since I had to open the AI can of worms, what do you think a CEO, like a smart CEO, could be looking at AI to do?
I think it's where the task is repetitive, where it's a fixed, kind of thing. One of the things that I heard early on, and because my background is as a programmer,
Mhm.
someone was talking about asking AI to write a big chunk of code to be able
Mhm.
to do a specific kind of thing. And they said they were shocked because it came back and it was like 98% correct. They still had to do
Mhm.
a few little tweaks because, of course, it's, how do you ask the question and do you get exactly the thing that you're looking for? But because coding is very logical, it's very precise, it has to be done in a certain way. Creativity is not really a part of it in in the logistics of writing
Mhm.
code. He was like, I know, and this was an experienced programmer. He says, I know it would have taken me hours, probably a full day
Mhm.
to write this. It was generated in 5 minutes. Yeah, and he said, and then, I spent another hour correcting it. He says, but I
Mhm.
probably would have spent an hour correcting my own code, as you test and debug and do that kind of thing. So the question to me is, how important is the creativity and the human element of the
Mhm.
thing versus how consistent, repetitive, we know what the answer
Mhm.
is going to be, right? Um, and so that, to me, that's where the balance is where we're looking for whether or not we're really needing that creative element, or whether or not it's something, super consistent. And within operations, there's various answers depending on, my whole philosophy is context matters. So I can't give you a nice generic thing that it's always going to work here. But but I think the answer really is about, does it is this something that really is consistent over time, and that we're always doing it the same way, or do we need some creativity in it? And then it's like, can it produce the base product that then, using the programming example, that I'm going to debug and finish, tweaking the last bit of it, right? And so I think there's a balance there of looking for those things. I know we've been experimenting it on developing base standard operating procedure documents, right? Because that's a fairly kind of consistent thing. Now, are they coming out perfect? Absolutely not. Do they need to be tweaked? Yes. Are they saving a ton of time? Yes. Because we aren't starting with a blank page, right? And so I think that that's where there's a lot of opportunity in the operations world, is to say, how do we save the blank page time? How do we get to something that we can start from, and then we put our human element into, and how much really requires a lot of creativity versus a little creativity. If it requires a lot of creativity, it may not even make sense to start with AI. If it requires a little creativity, then it probably makes really good sense to start with AI and get something there, and then put your creative touch to it. And it's, even though AI is the new hot thing, it's still a version of our automated email sequences. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff that's been around really, really for a very, very long time. And because, this has been my background and my history. People are like, oh, it's so new. And it's like, no, I'm really old. And I was doing it we were talking about this at the beginning. So,
Yeah, it's one of those things where very few things are truly new and novel. Oftentimes what's new and novel is the application of them.
Right. Or the availability. Right.
Yeah. Availability, cost, right? Technology
All of those
especially gets cheaper over time, gets easier to use over time. Like, all of that ends up what makes something feel new and novel that's actually been around for a long time. Okay, we're just about out of time, which is hard to believe, because it feels like we just started, but we've covered a lot of ground. And one of the things that I like about this series is that we always end on a practical tip, something that somebody watching or listening can implement right now in order to be moving their business forward. And so, under this idea of operations is a cost center, but yet so much more than just a cost center for a business, I'm curious, we're going to start with Sonia and then we'll go to Gwen, but what, from your perspective, could or should viewers do right now when it comes to understanding how operations management affects their finance? So I'm looking for, what decisions could they be making right now? What questions could they be answering, or what direct actions they could be taking?
Something I always do for my clients, just because it's really good to have an inventory, is understanding what programs are we using, what their purpose is, how much they cost, and how many seats do we have. It's literally like just a spreadsheet. It's literally those columns that I just said, list them all out, and you can see what is going on, what programs are you using, what business are you using, like what business apps or tools or whatever are you using and spending money on, and is anything overlapping? Can we condense? So that is one thing that I do in my own business. I do for every client. And that's just because it's important even for them to see it. Usually we really don't know every little thing that's going on in the background, right? Google Workspace. We don't even think that's a cost because it's so necessary for some of us, right? I mean, I forget that I pay for it. Like, I forget that I have to pay for certain subscriptions because I use them every day. Like, the cost, it just goes out, and it could raise by $6 and I wouldn't even notice, because I'm like, this is just so, I can't even live without it. So that's one thing. So that's one action that somebody could take right now. Super easy. Open up a Google Sheet, type in all the programs. If you have a VA, ask them to fill out the other details. And figure out where your subscription, where that subscription line item in your budget is going.
Okay, so your recommendation is really a spreadsheet that does your tech and your software as a service inventory. So what memberships you have, subscriptions, all of that stuff that has a recurring cost, getting that all into a single place so that you see where those dollars are going, you see when they're going, and then you can make educated decisions based on if there's any overlap between the two. What would be your tip, Gwen?
So mine is just an extension of what Sonia, and I would start exactly where Sonia is starting. But the second would be to do the same thing with all of your expenses, everything that
Mhm.
shows up in the expense line on your P&L. And most programs, you can have it do a percentage of your income. So you can actually see, quickly, it's like, this is 1%, 1%, 2%. And all of a sudden you see when this is 20%. And it's like, does that feel like it should be 20%? You can, look
Mhm.
and see where those pieces are and say, where can I reduce, or where does this feel out of proportion to the other expenses? The example that happened to me a long, long time ago was when I saw how much I was paying in credit card interest, what percentage it
Mhm.
was of my overall expenses. And it was like, oh, not paying interest would actually put a whole lot of money in my pocket. And so, but until I saw it and really looked at that, I didn't, it was the same kind of thing. It's just part of doing business. I have to pay credit
Mhm.
card, right? And so you can make different decisions once you see what those numbers are. So I would absolutely start where Sonia said, and then I would take it the next step out and look at all of the expenses and see how they relate to one another. And does that feel like the right kind of allocation?
All right. Well, thank you for that. I cannot believe that we are already wrapping up this installment of Biz Ops Exposed. So I want to say a huge thank you to our operations experts, Sonia and Gwen, for sharing their expertise and insights today. What we got out of today, or at least I hope you got out of today, is not just the importance of facing your numbers, but really knowing how much you're spending in each area, what you're spending it on, what that's going to, knowing if there's any overlap in any of those expenses. And going back to, earlier in the show, is really looking at roles and responsibilities assigned to everybody in your business, including yourself. If today's discussion has sparked any questions for you, or you're seeking to transform your business operations for better efficiency or profitability, I encourage you to reach out to Sonia and Gwen directly. And I would love to have you join us next time as we answer the big question of, can't we just get a VA to do it? Seriously, when it comes to operations management, probably one of the biggest questions that Sonia and Gwen hear all the time is, can't a VA just do it? So we're going to talk about that next week, same time, same location. Until then, my name is Tanya Kubo. Thank you for watching, and thank you for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you on our next journey together in Biz Ops Exposed. Have a great day.